Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, and today I'm going to be telling you about all the units that I am skipping and why. First, for a little bit of setup, I do have 3 accounts. They are each specialized in different elements. There is very little overlap, although I guess the most overlap would be in light and dark between those, because those are kind of easy elements to build, I think. But I have an ice earth account, I have a wind water account, and I have a lightning light account. So you might be noticing right off the bat that I don't have fire and I don't have dark. I do have a lot of teams that have a good unit spread for dark, that a third dark unit could really help. But I don't have much investment in VCs for dark. I do have one account that could work for dark. One account that might pull Sephiroth. But to respond to some comments about Sephiroth, like, dropping off or whatever, not being good, quote-unquote, even if that were true, and I don't think that it is, I think that there's a lot of things that could be said about the Dark Element that aren't necessarily reflections on Sephiroth. I don't think that Sephiroth is not good, though. I think he's kind of, in terms of new releases, he's the only new Dark unit, so he's kind of carrying his element right now. Which is, you know, true of a lot of the other top tier units that have come out since, of 100 cost units especially. They're kind of carrying their elements at this point. So that's not even a unique criticism. But also, I think that while he may not necessarily have, like, I've said Starlight Eleanor or Black Witch Helena, upon a bit of reflection, I don't think that's quite the case. I think it's actually more like maybe Yuna. And what I mean by that is that, at the very least, there is going to be a good long period of time where most of the old units were like the 184 units that came out before Sephiroth are going to be weaker than him. And to add insult to injury, they're also going to be at a lower potential level cap than him. And between those two things, it's just going to make him an amazing unit. He's a great investment. Will he be the best unit in the game in 4 months? I think you could make that argument. I think it would be very hard to make that argument. And I think that Bradley might win that argument. The thing is, you could try to make that argument still, and I think that that's really special for a unit that is, at that point, 4 months old. And really, I think that a lot of the new 140 units are probably going to age really well until there are 2 to 3 post-140 era units for each element. As for Yuffie, though, while I would consider pulling Sephiroth, but he's probably going to be a skip, Yuffie is absolutely, definitely a skip for me. Like, Skip City. Such skip. I did mention in the previous video that Fire went from having 0 archetypes to having 2. I think that Fire Evasion is probably the weaker of the 2. It is probably the better, or one of the better evasion teams in JP, for sure. But that's probably a pretty low bar. I'm also, from what I've seen of PvP videos, not a big fan of sure hit avoidance. Let me tell you why, though. Especially for a unit like Yuffie that has high evasion to begin with, it is a pretty cool skill while it's active. That being said, and let me actually look up Yuffie specifically, just to make sure that this is the case, that I'm not missing something. But no, her buff helps her ignore sure hit for 3 turns. So, if she's not in range for one of those turns, let's say this gives her 2 turns of sure hit avoidance, that's probably pretty good. That there are definitely certain matchups that is going to help you out a lot more in. She's also getting 30 Pierce Evasion, which I guess is becoming more relevant. And stacking that on top of that, because the Pierce Evasion is only going to be relevant while the sure hit avoidance is up. So I guess we're looking at super accurate. So she's dodging super accurate piercing units and units with a guaranteed hit for 3 turns. Again, sounds great. But DPS units don't reapply their buffs in combat. Actually, most units in general don't reapply their buffs in combat. So if your survivability is really dependent on this, you either need a team that can sweep really fast, or you need enough evasion that you can still get away from things after this buff ends. And now, in theory, the top part of the buff, the 100% damage reduction, which is great, by the way. I mean, these 3 things on one skill make Yuffie great, okay? I don't want to, like, piss on that. But, A, I'm not a fire player, so it's kind of irrelevant to me. And B, I don't know how much the 100% barrier... I don't know how often that lasts through the 3 turns, but potentially that lasts on the 4th turn. So you have maybe, in theory, 4 turns of protection from this, which is arguably pretty good. Really, looking at this buff made me feel a little bit better about Yuffie than I was initially, so I'm glad I actually looked her up. But that being said, I don't think that a lot of the units that are getting this added to their kit necessarily have the same strength in a single buff like that. And still, it's only 4 turns. This is going to leave her vulnerable, so if for whatever reason you don't have enough firepower to blast through those turns, Yuffie's going to run into trouble. That's... And so will any other unit with sure hit avoidance as their main gimmick. That's my opinion. Rissal. I don't think that Rissal is a bad unit. I just think that she's out of place. And my question is, will she be in place? Will she have a place before she becomes irrelevant? And I'm not sure that the answer to that is necessarily yes. And I think she needs at least one more partner that really synergizes well with her. Perhaps an evasive partner. Perhaps a partner that can make her more evasive. I don't really know what Wind wants to do. But personally, for my account that's running Wind, I am looking more into Wind Strike. I'm going to invest in Tifa early. I'm going to invest in Edward when I get the opportunity. And I'm probably going to either invest in June or just not run an entire Wind team. Because I'm also going to have Strike units that are going to work as the 3rd unit for that team. I also have ways of playing those units on other teams as well, on other Strike-based teams, because I'm going for Strike on my Wind account, which I guess makes sense given Edward and Tifa. So, Rissal, A thing that I don't think I've mentioned in a video yet, but I'm not counting on any of the holiday units. So, while, Winter Ravis has a 140 in JP and is relevant to the 140 meta, is arguably probably a really good limited partner, if not just really good partner for Raegan in general. I'm not counting her because I don't know when we're going to get that. It will probably take us till Christmas. That is probably the most likely time that we'll get a 140. And even at that point, there's probably going to be a new Christmas unit that's going to be arguably more hype. Now, is it going to be another ice unit? No. If you're an ice player, you still might want to save for one. I don't know. But, like, I'm just not counting these units, so I'm going to be skipping talking about Miranda as well for that reason. Winged Stern. Man. I actually really want this guy to be good. There's a lot of indications that he is good on JP, but there's also a lot of indications that he isn't. I mean, re-raise removal is not terribly uncommon, and he's kind of a glass cannon outside of that. When re-raise works, especially his re-raise is really good, it is pretty powerful for him. because it does make it a lot more likely that he gets in at least 2 hits in a fight. The first one that moves him in range to get 1 hit by somebody, and then with the CT up on re-raise, AP up and CT up when upgraded into 140. Plus increases slash and accuracy for 3 turns, which is not conditional, so that's only when you have the buff. I mean, it's not conditional on re-raise is how I'm reading this. The other things are conditional on re-raise. So that's interesting and actually makes this a better buff than I maybe thought it was. But at the same time, re-raise can be removed fairly easily, especially by meta units. Especially by the meta units that you would want to fight light with. Especially, and most elements I wouldn't necessarily compare as much by their counter element. But light and dark are supposed to be each other's counter element. So if you have a really obvious disadvantage to the most meta dark unit, and like as a matter of fact, okay, I guess it was Dagger Dancer Little Leela that had re-raise remove. Dark Fina has runic remove, which is different. So yeah, it's really just that he has a bad matchup with Sephiroth, who can absolutely one-hit him. In addition to removing his re-raise with LB. Because I think that he is markedly better in the matches where his re-raise is able to go off, because it has a lot of value on it. And I think actually this is kind of a commonality in the way that I see things, but I don't necessarily like high value re-raise because I feel like it's putting all of your eggs into maybe a basket that's easily dispelled. Quick edit here, Queen Mashuri is the unit that I was thinking about that has so many upgrades. She had an EX upgrade and her Dream Enhancement upgrade go to her re-raise, which is just too much, and it's too redundant to just be on one skill. I don't like that. That being said, while Ruinstern's re-raise does get upgraded, it's not actually one that I dislike. And let me mention like 2 reasons why that is the case. So the first, the actual upgrade itself adds a CT buff, which I think is very important for the way that his auto revive works in a fight. Great upgrade. The CT buff is something that was inherently a part of Queen Mashuri's kit, and also she has it for really the same reasons as him. Though being a mage, she doesn't need additional AP, so his is going to give him AP and CT up to make sure that he can do something strong as soon as he comes back to life, which in turn keeps him safe, because then he can hang on to the rest of that HP. Now, is that a very sustainable model to be using in guild battle? Maybe. It has 2 casts. But the thing that I think is really important about this skill is that even if, and I think it is really the downfall of Stern is when he hits re-raise removal, and both the meta light and dark teams are going to have this, ironically, in part because of Winged Stern himself. But the cool thing about this buff is that the slash and accuracy buffs will still benefit him regardless for 3 turns, as long as he's not like completely debuffed, as long as it's just re-raise removal. Those can be removed with a debuff remove, or with a buff removal, a dispel. Those can be dispelled. Those are buffs that can be dispelled, whereas the auto revive isn't. Those would have to be done by separate functions. So it's actually a pretty cool buff in that respect, in that it would take 2 different types of dispel to get rid of it in its entirety, and that the 2 parts of itself aren't dependent on one another, and that additionally it is a defensive and an offensive buff in one, which is, while I again think it is an improvement over buffs like this because of the independence, it's really reminiscent of Astrius's courage, which is really a big part of what makes him a great unit, I believe. So maybe I am underrating Winged Stern. We'll see how much Viz I have when it comes down to it. He's kind of in my maybe pull list, but not someone that I'm really trying to save Viz for. The messed up thing, actually, is that with Ruin Stern getting a 140, there's a lot that could be said about why Ruin Stern is not necessarily a great unit. But he does have a 100% damage barrier thing, like we were talking about for Yuffie. So he does have a similar gimmick to make sure that he probably survives at least one attack. Unfortunately, multi-hit attacks, especially strong ones, or ones that have like 4 hits so that he's still getting hit by the last 3, are also going to break through that in a pretty nasty way. But I guess what I'm saying here is that he compares a lot more to Ruinstern than I would like, and I've been burned really hard by Ruinstern in the past. So while I think this guy has an incredible design and like is a cool looking unit that I wish I could rock, I've been burned by that type of unit before. Gilgamesh is a trash can. I know there's a lot of people who are like dedicated Gilgamesh users out there, but like, Gilgamesh is a fucking trash can as a unit, and I will hear nothing otherwise. I'm skipping Roy. Roy's a fire unit. You know how I feel about fire units. Roy's cool though, and if there was a fire unit that I feel bad about skipping, it would be Roy. Führer Bradley. I'm not a big fan of Führers. I'm actually not a super fan of playing villains. Especially Bradley. Like, he's not even a cool villain. Cool villains are people like Vegeta, who eventually become cool and edgy. Führer Bradley is just an authoritarian dictator. He doesn't have redeeming qualities, really. He is, however, an incredibly powerful unit, so if I can get myself past that, I might pull him for Earth, just because if I'm looking at the design of Bradley as a unit, ignoring having seen Full Metal Alchemist, he's actually like the archetype that I like most in units, which are just complete tank busters, which have a bit of power behind them too. And he definitely has that, so he's very appealing to me. Oh man, people who don't think I fact check the things that I say have not watched one of my videos, because now I have to give an interjection about King Bradley, because his name is King Bradley. Something that I somehow never picked up on while watching Full Metal Alchemist, because people either call him Bradley, eventually Wrath, or Führer King Bradley. Now, I always thought that this was somehow like, I figured there's a hyphen, like Führer/King, right? Like that was the title. He was the king and the Führer. Or that, you know, people weren't sure that when they were writing this, maybe that people would understand that a Führer, maybe you weren't well educated on the history of the 20th century, or you just aren't very good with German, you wouldn't pick up on it, so they added king in there to make it make more sense. And that is still actually kind of how I feel about this character, but as it turns out, he was a homunculus that was literally named King Bradley. Like, before taking power, his name is King. His first name is King. Which brings me back to a point that I made in the original video, in that, one, why not call him Wrath, maybe? That's equally potentially his name. Wrath the Furious even kind of fits the naming conventions for this game, like Zazan the Unkillable. And by the way, Wrath the Furious and Zazan the Unkillable sounds like a pretty cool team. And also, I'm hyping myself up for Bradley. Goddammit. Okay, I kind of hate myself for this, but I'm going to have to interject into my own interjection at this point, because what I wanted to say before my mind derailed and went in a completely different direction is, why is Queen Queen? Queen should be Makoto. This is already a game with queens, and this is already a What happened? Queen is one of the most popular characters in Final Fantasy Type 0, and now I am way off course. But bringing it back in, this is not the king that I want to see either. His first name is King, but there's a Final Fantasy character, also from Type 0, who is just named King. It's not a nickname, it's not a... They were both born named King. I'm just saying, call him Wrath, and you don't have a potential overlap with the future Final Fantasy character that we're already going to have to deal with when... Please, Gumi, implement Final Fantasy Type 0. But my point is that while I always assumed that his name was Bradley and that King was somehow a part of his title, no, actually his first name is King. It's not a title. It's just that when people say his full name, they also address him by his title. And when people... Yeah. So, people either refer to him purely by his last name out of respect, or they say his full title and full name, which is Fuhrer King Bradley. So, I am the one that is wrong. It is perfectly fine. There's no cover-up or anything. His name is literally King Bradley. Anyways. And I don't know if I, assumed that, the Bradley family was somehow the Bradley family because his first and last name are Bradley. I mean, honestly, I don't know what I thought his first name was. Maybe I thought his first name was Wrath Bradley. I don't know. This has been a dramatic reading of fucking... Full Metal Alchemist lore FAQ. Back to the video. Raegan. I'm skipping Raegan. I often forget that Raegan came out and that he's an ice unit. That's how much I'm skipping Raegan. The reason that I'm skipping Raegan, though, is as an ice player, I like the missile meta. I like the ice missile meta. I think I will continue to like the ice missile meta. I think I would like to see new ice missile units, maybe. Or maybe a new ice tank to put in front of my two already good ice missile units. I'm waiting for Elia 140. And again, this is this whole line of characters right here in the middle, I'm skipping all of them, and they all suffer from really cool designs that I really don't want. Sucks to be y'all, doesn't it? Vega is probably not a unit I'm skipping, but I'm going to give that some more time and reflection. Kefka is definitely a skip, but he's a fire unit. You've got the pattern already. You know I don't have a fire account. I'm going to skip fire units. I'm not even going to discuss why I'm skipping Kefka. It's because he's a fire unit. Why should you skip Kefka? Because he's a fire For real, if you are a dedicated fire player, then Roy Mustang and Kefka is probably the closest thing that fire's going to get to a stable meta. The thing is, if you're hoping for an outstanding fire team, I still don't think this is it, because it doesn't do well against its counter, which is water, it has always been water's flavor that they're really great anti-magic element. I think fire has potential for that reason in being a physical element. But then again, this fire team might also truck through a lot of the other elements. So, maybe saying that it has possibly the worst water matchup of any fire team isn't that big of a deal. Also, if you are really concerned about your fire team having a bad water matchup, you could always use units like Alphonse. Or Summer Helena, if you have glove VCs. But other than that, I don't think I have ever seen a unit in the game that gets more walled by Celeste. I take that back, there might be a unit. And they would have to have an entirely reflectable kit, be in fire, and not have status on their LB, because I think that's probably the one trick that Kefka has for Celeste, is that his LB isn't reflectable, as most aren't. I don't think any of them are, actually. And it has status on it, which is going to be good against other mages. That might be the one and only way that he trips up a Celeste. I think he's going to be really reliable Celeste KOs for water players. And then Dialdo? Ooh, how do I feel about Dialdo? So, I have put my feelings out there on tanks that don't have extra survivability mechanics. And maybe we have gotten to the point where extra survivability mechanics aren't as important as they used to be, especially because Sephiroth removes most of them really effectively. And he's not the only unit that does this, he's just the biggest stick to beat down a unit like that with. Dialdo not having these actually might be a mark of more modern tank design, perhaps, because I don't think let me see, does Alphonse have courage in his kit? That's a no. No courage or re-raise. So, really, stylistically, he is a lot like Alphonse. He has more healing, which my concern there is that there's a lot of healing power down that might be a problem for him. Although, debuff resistance would kind of deal with healing power down, but we're also running into the same issue there. If you're trying to rely on debuff resistance to save your healing power, well, the problem is he's not going to reapply that buff. Actually, tanks are probably the one unit class, especially inaccurate tanks, if they're going against evasion, probably the one and only unit class that's very likely to reapply their buffs in the middle of a fight. So that debuff resistance might actually be more relevant than something like sure hit avoidance is for Yuffie, specifically because he's a tank that can't hit the broadside of a barn, is my impression. So I really want to see more analysis of Dialdo as a unit before I make any hard statements on him. What I am thinking right at the moment, though, just to end this video out, is that I really hope that Dialdo is good. I hope that he's amazing. Because I want to have someone to save for that can justify me not pulling Fuhrer Bradley, because it really does look like, as an Earth player, I am doing my account a disservice by not pulling this guy. But I would really like an excuse not to pull for this guy. Like, people have their waifus, right? Fuhrer Bradley is like my anti-waifu. He is the antithesis of the type of personality that I want to pull for. There are definitely other homunculi that I would have been interested in seeing in this game. It didn't have to be Bradley. Just saying. Anyways, this is a fucking way too long video. But I hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one.